Hey everybody, Jimmy from Superpath here with another episode of Content Briefly. Really excited to have Ramli John from AppQs on today. We'll be talking about AppQs, and we'll get to that. But Ramli, first, it's so good to officially meet you. Could you introduce yourself and talk a little bit about who you are and your background?
A little bit about my background. I've been in marketing for 10 years, but I wrote a book around onboarding, and that what got me into AppQs, which is a software tool for onboarding. And I was really writing more about thought leadership in the past 18 months that I've been here. I'm excited to just be here and talk about this.
Super cool. So the book came first.
The book came first. I was working at Product Led with Wes Bush at that time before I joined AppQs.
How about AppQs? Can you tell us a little bit about AppQs? They're in some ways, I feel like just a classic B2B SaaS company. Like they fulfill this need that every other SaaS company has. They've been around for a while as well. You can explain it better than I can. Could you just tell us a little bit about the company and the product itself?
Yeah, I was started with a couple of folks, Joel Jackson, Noel, and Jonathan Kim, way back in 2013. Jonathan at that time was working at HubSpot, and he created the software to help companies to onboard their users to their product. Like you can create product tours, in-app experiences, everything else with that. That software now it's available on mobile. People can mobile apps can create this
Oh,
in
cool.
other places. So I think that's exactly what AppKeys is at. They're really focused on helping SaaS companies specifically improve their like product adoption or retention or increase their engagement and usage with the product.
Super cool. So it starts with onboarding, but it also it bleeds into retention later on, I assume, which is all, I guess, sort of part of the same package, but maybe a good distinction for folks.
Yeah.
Could you talk about the marketing team? Like, what does the marketing function as a whole look like? So you're heading up content. Is that
Yep.
content program director? I think is your title, which is a cool title. I like that. Where does content fit in? Like, what else is happening in marketing?
Yeah, so we have a few other functions. Product marketing, of course, we've been releasing a bunch of new features. Somebody's in charge of that. The paid and growth side, Meg is in charge of director of growth. We have in-house marketing designer. She's actually shout out to Tanya. She's the design director. She designs all of our pages that we create for our content, for our blog, for our YouTube channel as well. As well as we have a marketing ops person, Jared, and that's the team. It's 7. The company size right now is about 100, So we are a small team that's like running this company going forward.
Yeah, that's very cool. I actually had the chance to work on the AppQs blog a
That's
little bit
cool.
back in the day through an agency, of course, not directly. But we worked with Ty Magnan and then
That's cool.
Margaret Kelsey.
Margaret.
And AppQs was doing really cool work. This was probably 2016 or so. But even before that, AppQs was investing pretty heavily in content, like more so than other SaaS companies were at the
Yeah.
time. And I'm sort of curious. So the commitment to that continues, which I suppose is a signal that it's worked. It's good. It's something the company wants to keep on doing. But I would be a little curious. I feel like we talk a lot on this podcast about launching, but you're not really in that phase. This is it's a mature company and a mature content program.
Yeah.
This is a huge, very broad question, but tell us about that. What's it, you know what I mean? What are you factoring in as you think about like this kind of long history of an investment in content as you think about, what's going on today?
Earlier, the investment in content was more an investment in SEO. It's like how to cannibalize like organic and get more rankings. But we have seen more competitors pop up around the same tool, user flow, user pilot. Intercom has brought out with their product tours, and it's like a race to the bottom to see, there's like top 11 onboarding tips, and then the next
Yeah.
one releases top 12, top 15. So like it really is more increasing there. I think the transition has in the last like 2 to 3 years has been more so how do we establish ourselves not just like top search result, but like establish ourselves as a leader in the space, putting out like really great educational content, as well as like putting out opinions that we have about how we're improving our own onboarding and seeing how others are improving theirs. So we're sharing like data and sharing how others are doing it and like our own experience through that. That really has where it's evolved more so in a mature space where there's multiple companies who are like competing for the search result. How do we compete outside of the search result and really like get into people's mind and like see when they think about onboarding and they're looking to improve their retention or the activation, how does AppQues get to the top of their top lists that they're going to be looking at? And one way to do that is through education. A lot of there's certain companies that has done a good job of this that we're inspired by. Examples is like HubSpot, of course, where they've released the HubSpot Academy, where we've structured a academy that we can talk about later around Product Adoption Academy. Also inspired by younger companies like Mutiny, where like they are putting out this amazing like content, even though they're like a young team. And I think their the content team is only one person. I'm not sure if they've hired more, but like it's interesting how they're playing this approach of establishing themselves as leaders in the space, as experts, rather than going towards more of organic approach. So I'd see that more mature companies are probably more shifting and thinking about, well, okay, we have more competitors in our space. We can only do so much to rank higher. How do we establish our content in other ways and establish ourselves as experts there?
That's great. That's so interesting. One thing I've noticed in talking to a lot of content folks is that there's like a sort of subconscious anxiety that a lot of content teams have about the amount of traffic that they get.
Mm-hmm.
Do you sleep better at night knowing that there's this large library of content that was primarily created for search that I assume is driving, recurring traffic month over month? And maybe I'm assuming too much, but it sort of frees you up to think a little bit more deeply about things that will move the needle beyond search. I think a lot of teams they get stuck on the search piece, and it creates a constraint for them that makes it a little more difficult to get into the academy type content or thought leadership or other things.
That's a really good point. I do feel like there is we have a few pieces that is ranking really well. Example is like, best way to launch a product. Like we have like a messaging guide around that is ranking really well, bringing us traffic. It does probably, if you put it that way, it does make me sleep better at night. But I do still think about that, like, is it good traffic, or is it like, does it really help the company overall? But something to think about for sure.
I'm curious about net new content versus, content maintenance, refreshes or pruning or other things you might do. How do you think about that today? And then I promise we can sort of leave the theme of, AppQues has had a blog for a long time behind us to talk about other things.
Yeah, I think a big part of it is like restructuring and like pruning our content was a big part of what last year happened. It seems like things are changing. I'm sure we'll get into this with AI. And like really things are changing. And now we're thinking, should we continue like thinking about like content hubs and pruning content that is not really bringing stuff up? There's something that we're currently working through. Some of the SEO folks that I've talked to have said that this is just a guess because we don't really know what Google or even Bing is doing. That they're really like thinking a lot more about authority and relevance around this topic, more so than the technical stuff that has really played a big part in the past few years in terms of SEO. So we are in the last few months have been rethinking, should we be getting more into video? Because it seems like certain SG responses are getting like showing up TikTok, and we did launch a YouTube channel last year, and one of our best performing content pieces right now have video in them. So like, what is user onboarding? If people go to YouTube right now and type user onboarding, I created a playlist, guide to user onboarding, with like 15 videos, and that's the first thing on the list on YouTube that shows up, and it does show up on some search result because of that. So I think that's something that we've been thinking a lot about, is like, should we think about content beyond just like traditional SEO written form, rather than like thinking about thought leadership and things like that. So it's still up for debate for sure.
That's very interesting, and kind of makes me think of something related, which is that a lot of SaaS companies, it used to be like the blog was the content strategy, and then that kind of expanded to like, I've heard Kevin Lee, formerly of Buffer and Oyster and a few other well-known companies, talk about the blog plus playbook, where it's like, you have a blog, you have an academy, you have a resource center, which might have like, there's maybe a section of guides. So it's like blog plus, but now even that playbook has expanded to include video. And in some cases, a lot of SaaS companies now are doing podcasts. I find it interesting because it used to just be that like the blog just helped you get that top of funnel traffic. All these other things are aimed at more like that middle and bottom of the funnel, where you're trying to educate people about the product, move them a little further along. And so I'd be curious, you had mentioned that AppQs had launched an academy. Is that the main purpose? Like, is that a fairly product oriented content initiative?
That one is probably more like middle of the funnel. The reason why I say that is like we try to minimize mentioning app use as much. There are some courses that are more like product focused, and that is in another academy that we have called App Use University that our CS team created. I've been like really looking at what HubSpot has done with the HubSpot Academy, where they do have like top of the funnel courses, like social media 101, where they probably don't talk about their HubSpot social as much, but there is one where like they have a whole certification course on HubSpot social. Within the academy itself, you can have top, middle, and bottom of the funnel, and that's something that we're currently working on. Our academy right now, our product adoption academy, is probably more like top, middle of the funnel than more product focus itself.
That's interesting. Do you have a sense, like, how much content do you publish on a monthly basis?
Publishing, we probably publish like maybe one, maybe two in a week. We have definitely like reduced it in the last few months, just trying to figure out exactly what we're gonna do with AI, because like publishing in this changing landscape might not be the best strategy, and like really figuring out what is next for our SEO, our search, what is next for our content beyond, like in a post AI SEO world. How will we like continue to establish ourselves as a leader? And I'm talking about here on the blog side, academy in terms of courses, probably one, we're working on one course right now every 2 to 3 months, and then like producing like a report that's like a survey driven report or content that's more thought leadership, like once every quarter as well. So we are like heavily considering how we're investing between blog that you mentioned and the blog plus side, the academy and the podcast and the video and other places.
I feel like it's probably worth stating explicitly that this is probably the craziest couple of months content marketing has ever experienced. It's like everything has been thrown into question and there's not a lot of answers yet. Are you able to share anything that you're thinking about on the AI front? Any cool ways you're using it right now?
One cool way we're using it right now, more like an experiment. What kind of user onboarding tool are you if you're a Taylor Swift song? So something weird like that, and we're using AI to like see like, okay, how will each connect to another one? I have used it particularly for like fleshing out more built out structured content where like I already have the points, I already have like the quotes from people, and I'm just like, hey, give me a first draft. And I edit it down to something that makes more sense and matches our voice. I have done that a few times, and that's worked well. It's probably something that we're considering in the future. I've also used it to write some scripts, YouTube scripts, where like I ask, hey, write me a script about like, tips about onboarding, make it funny, give some examples. And that's the thing with AI is like you can't just like give it like a sentence. You have to like give it a structure to make it really sound good. Like add me puns, give it jokes, like give it life.
Yeah, that's super interesting. And I guess another question regarding content creation: who writes? Do you write? Do in-house folks write? Freelancers, agencies? Like we've been asking everybody basically like who's the kind of muscle behind the content creation, because that does seem like it's shifting. That's probably over the last couple of years, not over the last few months, but I'd be curious at AppQs, like who's doing that heavy lifting?
Right now, the content team looks like I forgot to mention that I do. We are a 2-person content team. There's me, and then there's somebody, the senior content marketer. She manages like 6 freelancers that we have right now. That was helping write content for the blog itself. In terms of like I'm going back to this blog plus because I've been thinking a lot. Like it just sounds so good. Anything on the plus side, we try to keep in-house as much as possible. Like I'm writing some of my YouTube scripts, adding spice to it. That Taylor Swift / onboarding LinkedIn post that Eric, our VP of marketing, posted up that he wrote himself. He used AI and he fleshed it out himself. So a lot of like the more thought leadership stuff, we do keep in-house. Like, and once we have the process and we have like kind of a layout that we can reuse, is when we start thinking about a few ways to reorganize it.
Got it. One other thing we've been asking everybody is about content team meetings. Do you have a weekly or a monthly sync? Can you share a little bit about what the agenda is like for that call? And the things sort of specifically that I'm curious about are, I'm sure there's sort of an update, like I'm doing this, you're doing that, when's it due, that type of thing. But, is there a brainstorming element to it, a review element where you kind of like looking back as like a postmortem on other stuff, or just anything else that kind of helps you like think deeply about what's working and what's not?
Yeah, we follow a system called EOS where like every meeting has it's called an L10 where you grade your meeting after the meeting and give it a score
Oh,
out of 10,
oh,
right?
interesting.
Yeah. So the way that it works starts off with like highlights, and then we have a weekly data board that we all review. I can go through the metrics. I know that was one of the questions. I had to pull up our data board later and see which one's like on track or off track. And then we add it to our issue list. And then the next part after the data review, we'll look at our issues. So issues could be anything that are metrics off base or something's behind schedule in terms of content. Is there anything coming up? And we just discuss the issue in that hour we have that week to see if there's anything we can like figure out and debug together. And then the last part is like a to-do. Like here's what's the next steps in the next week that we have together and figure it out. This is what we're gonna do before we meet next week for our next L10. And then the grading is like 10 is like this is the best meeting in the world that we've had so far, and then 0 is like this is the worst meeting we have in the world. And that's essentially what L means leadership. So leadership 10. So that's your team score for that specifically. So
That's so interesting. Is there a piece of software that you use to enable that?
we use a software called 90. It's the word 90.io. But in my previous company we were at Product Led with Wes, we were just using a spreadsheet. We were just using spreadsheet and Notion to host all of this so that we can track it on a week-to-week basis.
I'm kind of fascinated by that. So I assume that like meetings that are scored well means it's productive. Are there some meetings that are, that get a 1? And what do like, are there meetings that get cut from the calendar because they're not really necessary? Not because it's a bad meeting,
Right.
but just because maybe it could be done asynchronously.
That's true. There are certain situations where like, do we have any like meaty issues this week? Or is this something that we can discuss async? In those situations, yes, we do cut it off. Most of the time, we do come up with issues as we discuss like what's on our workflow board or what's our metrics doing. So I haven't seen a 1 yet. The worst I've seen is 5. And usually when somebody gives the lowest score or the highest score, let's say everybody gives it an 8, but somebody gives it a 10, the follow-up is like, how could we make this a 10? Is the discussion.
Yeah.
Sometimes
Yeah.
it's more like we need to come up with more issues, more meaty issues. Like it's kind of shallow right now, our discussion. Or it could be like we didn't really get into, the big issues that we should have brought up sooner rather than later. So I've never got on a 1.
That's good. I guess that's good. I am curious about metrics. The thing that I'm curious about is like, what are the couple of numbers that tell you you're moving in the right direction?
Yes. And once again, this is shifting because, our focus more on thought leadership. Obviously, we're so focused on organic in the past 18 months. Like we're looking at organic sessions and organic signups. So like out of the organic, how many of them ended up signing up? And kudos to our marketing ops person, Jared, who like, how do you attribute organic signups? So I'm like, I'm not sure. We use HubSpot, Google Analytics. That's a whole discussion on its own about attribution, but we do have organic signup as our tool. And then that's on more on the organic side. In terms of like thought leadership, we look at we released this product-led experience report that is like this quarter's server-driven content. And we look at, it's ungated. So we're looking at page views on that. And then the other one, we have a program called Product-Led Growth Assessment. And we're looking at completions of this quiz that tells people, are they a
That's interesting.
beginner, are they an intermediate, or are they like an expert level product-led growth company? And based on that, we suggest like you should take a look at our course or do this or do that. The other 2 programs that we have that is more thought leadership, we have a podcast. So I look at like podcast downloads and listens that's available on YouTube and on our platform, as well as our certification issued for our academy. So it seems like the metrics have shifted lately more to focus on those plus side to content rather than the blog side of the content.
I mean, I feel like that makes a ton of sense. I have a couple follow-ups, but one quick one is the podcast. Does that fall under your purview or is that a separate team?
In terms of like running it, like me interviewing folks, that is me. We do have like an editor that is like a freelancer that like does all the editing. That's makes me all hands off. So yes, it is under my team.
Cool. That's interesting. I've talked to a few folks about this and it seems like 50-50. Sometimes audio content falls under the content team. Sometimes they have a separate team dedicated just to that. I guess probably because the medium is so different, but
Yeah.
content is content. The planning, the execution, and a lot of it is pretty similar. The other thing I wanted to follow up with you about was tools. Are there any tools that you and your team use that stand out? Things that maybe help with productivity or other things, research tools, tools for distribution or publishing or anything else?
Yeah, in terms of like the podcast side, we've been exploring a lot on like how to repurpose our YouTube videos, our YouTube interviews more easily as a short. Come across this cool tool called Opus Clip. So it's opus.pro where like you plug in your YouTube video and then it's an interview style. It will like cut like what it thinks is the most viral and like it'll format it and reposition it so that the face of the speaker is like centered on it. So like if there's two people talking, right, you and me like side by side per se, it will cut between the two and was like, what the heck? How is it doing this? And it even adds like Alex Hermosi style captions. So I think that's like something that we've been using lately in this like past few weeks to like put more content on shorts, YouTube shorts, as well as like TikTok, just to see like the if there's any traction there. That's one tool that's cool. Productivity wise, like we've been using like the typical stuff Notion, but like we plugged in Notion AI to like have context. I know ChatGPT has like been expanding their ability to like take inputs, but they still have like a I don't if it's a 10,000 word limit, but like Notion, we have all our planning docs there in Notion, and we can just say, hey, summarize like this interview, or like take this piece of content and like give me a tweet based on this long like 3,000 word article or something like that, and it can produce a few tweets that our KK, our senior content manager, can like tweet to post up on our Twitter and LinkedIn.
That's great. I love that. I've been doing a kind of similar thing. It's sort of funny because I feel like whenever the topic of generative AI comes up on this podcast, it's usually in the context of, are you using it to enable content creation? But some of the things it's doing are more behind the scenes. And the example I was just going to cite was I use a tool called Grain to record our sales calls.
Yeah.
And their AI is fantastic. It automatically creates a summary of the call, which totally replaces the notes that I used to take. It's that good. So now I just take those notes and I copy and paste them into our CRM and I don't have to write anything. I guess it's basically the same use case as like taking like a bunch of planning docs or a very long blog post and just saying, just condense it for me,
Exactly.
That's a really, really cool use case for AI, I think.
Yeah, totally. And even like repurposing, like people don't realize, people like to preach about content repurposing, but they don't realize like how much work it sometimes takes to like make the repurposing look good or like be good. So
yeah,
I feel like that's potentially where AI can help with, is like, here's how to repurpose this blog into a video so that it's like YouTube script ready or something else.
Yeah, that's cool. I'm curious about what you're thinking over the next 6 months, not necessarily in like a industry wide thing. I feel like that's an unfair question right now because just like, who knows? But like for you and for AppQ specifically, are there some things you have in the hopper or some things you're noodling on that you anticipate spending a lot of time on in the next 6 months?
Nothing super big. Well, maybe there's one thing super big. We're definitely gonna start really focusing on more like that middle and bottom of the funnel content pieces, specifically the academy. Right now we have two education programs. One is the AppQ's University that the CS team created, that's more like product focused, and then the Product Adoption Academy that's more like education focused. And I feel like there's a natural user experience progression where somebody learns about like how to improve the onboarding, and out of curiosity they want to learn a tool that can help them do that. So from a learning experience standpoint, it makes sense to like integrate them into one place. I think the second thing that in the next 6 months we're really looking at, we're seeing like really promising like stats from our YouTube and like our videos. I don't know what that looks like, but we're in the very early stage of discussion. Is this something that we should like double down on, or something that we have some folks within our team that have like not even marketing team, our product engineering, our design team, that have like video experience. And like, I wonder if we can tap into their expertise and get them to come on video, or like highlight their expertise somehow. We're not entirely sure. There's a very early stage, and that's like we're still trying to figure out exactly what that is, because it seems like that's something that is gonna be hard for generative AI to do. One day it will be like it'll scan your body, and then you can like produce YouTube videos that
Yeah,
looks
yeah.
like you, talks like you, is very natural. But at this point, it is like one of those hard to copy things that you can highlight expertise, and it's hard to reproduce with generative AI.
Yeah, that's a great point, because like as the generative AI thing is commoditizing written content, all of the social platforms are leaning so heavy on video.
We noticed that, yeah.
And that's, I don't think that's an accident, right? So I think you're wise to be like thinking about how and where and why the investment in video should keep going. So that's super interesting. Anything else AppQ's content related that I should have asked you or that you want to touch on, but that I didn't prompt you for?
The other piece that I've been thinking a lot about is like templates. Like, how do we share templates and like examples? We have this content program called Good UX, goodux.appcues.com, where it shows like some of the best like onboarding experiences and examples. And I've seen like companies like Hypercontext with Hiba Amin like do really well, where they show like templates of how the best has done it, or even Fellow.app, where they've shown like the best 101 templates for meetings. And I feel like that's something that is also potentially like also hard to copy. And like how do I've been thinking a lot about like how that would fit into everything, where it becomes more of a curation. Like the problem with like generative AI is like we're gonna get a crap ton of content. They'll rise to the top. The need for somebody or something or a company to curate this content somehow. You're doing a good job with that, with the community that you've built here, and like really like you are a trusted voice when it comes to content. And I feel like that's where the thing is going. And I'm not sure. I've also heard a lot about like B2B influencers, like how B2C side at, but I don't know what that looks like right now. But that's another rabbit hole that you don't want to open up a can of worms.
Yeah, yeah. Honestly, the thing that I really appreciate about this conversation is you've covered every base. As someone thinks about a content strategy, like you're checking every single box, the top, middle, bottom of the funnel. It's SEO, it's thought leadership, it's sales enablement, it's multimedia. There's just like anything that a content strategy could have is in here. But it's not just that you've jammed it all in. It's all like quite thoughtful and proven. That's the other thing I find so interesting about AppQs is like, this didn't start yesterday. This is 10 years old at this point. Like all of this has evolved in the way that it has for a reason. So kudos to you. Really, really interesting.
Thank you.
Ramli, where can we send folks? You have a couple of things going on. We mentioned the book, Product-Led Onboarding, which we'll definitely link to folks. Where else can they find you, follow you, and your podcast? Where can they listen to your podcast?
Yes, people can find me on LinkedIn, on Twitter. Just Google my name, Ramli John. I'm everywhere with that handle. In terms of my show, I have a newsletter called Marketing Power Ups. I'm going to have Jimmy on the show, so I'm super excited about that. I chatted with Ryan Law this morning, and I'm having
cool.
Devin later this month. So like Margaret Kelsey was also on. I think you might have worked with her when she was working at AppQ. So like there's some really amazing folks who's been on that show that I'm like pretty excited about. You can look up Marketing Power Ups or marketingpowerups.com for that.
Ramli, so good to finally meet. Glad we got to do it in this format. I'm sure people will really appreciate that we could record it so they could, capture some of your experience and your knowledge. So thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Jimmy.
Take care, everybody.